Good morning, Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Baptist Church down in Tull with your morning devotion. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 27 today. It's a great chapter. It teaches a lot about life lessons. This is where Esau and Jacob get into a wrestling match, if you would. Isaac, their daddy, is about to die, and he's going to take care of business as far as who he's going to give the blessing to. And so as he realizes that he's about to die, he calls in Esau, which physically was the older son. That could never be changed. He was the first one to come out of the womb, and so he, by numbers, had the place of being firstborn. However, if you go back to chapter 25, you remember how that he came in one day from hunting. He hadn't been very successful. He thought he was going to die from hunger, even though we knew literally he wasn't, but he felt like he was. And in a weak moment, Jacob was able to wrestle away from him, just as they had wrestled in the womb. Jacob was able to wrestle away from Esau his birthright, and Esau traded it for a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, which didn't seem like anything significant at the time, and maybe now that we're a few chapters later, that's because Esau really never intended to give it away in the first place. But God saw that commitment, and God was going to hold him to it. And so we get to chapter 27, and we find that Isaac is about to die, and so he calls in Esau, and he is going to give him a blessing. But he said, first of all, I'm hungry, I want to eat, go out and kill something, because he was the hunter in the family. And so it says that he went out into the plains. I do think that's significant, because perhaps hunting on the plains might be a little bit more difficult than hunting anywhere else, number one. Number two, he didn't want him to just go, to the herd or to the flock and just get something out of there. He wanted that wild game taste, and he wanted Esau to go out and do it. So while it is that Isaac may have felt like, hey, this is just strategic, I want something out of the field, perhaps it was God's way of maneuvering, because it removed Esau from the picture long enough now for Jacob to come in, and because Rebekah had overheard what Isaac had said, and so she went and got Jacob and said, you need to go in there and dress up like your brother so that your daddy will give you the blessing instead of giving it to Esau. Now, we know that Jacob was a trickster, and perhaps now we know which side of the family he got it from. And all of this brings about a life lesson, and that is that, whenever we start depending upon ourselves and our own means to solve problems, or if we have to resort to trickery in order to get it done, you got to back away from it and say, is this really the way God wants me to act? Now, God was going to do what God wanted to do, because he was going to maintain right. And whenever it was that Esau gave his birthright away to Jacob, God honored that, and God was going to make sure that that's what happened. No matter what man tried to do to change it in the process, God was going to hold that person to it. So there's a life lesson in that. And the life lesson in that is this: that if you make a commitment to do something here on earth, you may try to wiggle your way out of it. You may try through crafty means to get around it. But remember, God's going to hold you accountable to it. Because if we as God's children make a commitment to something, then God intends for us to follow through with it. Otherwise, we are deceiving people and we are disappointing God. And that's not a way that we should be as Christians. We find that that's what Jacob did. He deceived his daddy, and he was going to disappoint God, but God said, you guys do whatever you want to do down there, but I'm going to hold you accountable to what happened. So Esau regrettably gave away his birthright, which means he gave away his first place in line. And God was going to make sure, in spite of Jacob's weaknesses, his trickery, his mom's interfering for him because he was a baby's boy, God was going to make sure it was done right. So Jacob goes out, he gets a lamb out of the flock. He comes in, he kills it, he puts it on, dresses up like he's going to be Esau, even puts on his own clothes so he smells like it. He fixes the food the way that it would appear that it was wild game, and he goes in, he takes advantage of his visually impaired daddy, who can't distinguish Esau from Jacob. And so when Isaac got a taste of it, he thought, well, this is Esau. And so he gave the blessing to him. And if you look at what the blessing entailed, it's in verses 27 through 29. It says the blessing would include this: that Jacob would have dominion over the earth, that he'd have an abundance of harvest, that nations would serve him, and that his brothers would bow down to him, and those that would curse him would be cursed, and those that would bless him would be blessed. That's a fivefold blessing right there. And while it is that may seem strange to our custom today, it was what worked and what they practiced in that day, and it was as good as a will today in a court where you got a good lawyer that can hold it up. And so this is what Jacob received, yes, in a way of trickery, from his daddy Isaac as he was dying, but nonetheless it was given to him. We know how the story goes. Esau comes in, he finds out that he's been tricked. He felt like he had been tricked the first time. He actually mentions it, when in reality Esau just blundered it the first time, and he's trying to project blame on somebody else for something that was his own fault. And that's a life lesson within itself. You do something irresponsible, man up, woman up, take it. You did it, not them. You let it happen, not them. But yet Esau never did get over that. And we find that as the way the rest of the story goes, he harbored bitterness in his heart toward Jacob, because he felt like not only had he been tricked once, but he'd been tricked twice. I guess you could apply the old adage, first time shame on you, second time shame on me. But in reality, Esau had nobody to blame but himself. And when you see the chapter finishing out, we find that Isaac had not yet been married, but Esau had already married 2 women at one time. And whenever it was that Isaac and Rebekah said to Jacob, we don't want you to marry any of these Canaanite women around here. We don't want you to marry outside your faith or your family. And they were going to send him away to find a wife from the family. And what Esau did was, he turned around and he heard what his mom and dad had said, and out of spite he went and married a Canaanite woman. And you can trace back the lineage and find where it came from, but where he got his wife was from Ishmael. Ishmael was remembered, he was born to Hagar, who was the Egyptian slave that Abraham had slept with and had a child outside of the boundaries of what God intended to happen. I think that Esau was driven by bitterness, and out of resentment, he said to his mom and dad, well, if that's what you want Jacob to do, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. And he picked up his toys and went home, and he got a wife from an area that was not approved by his mom and dad. Here's the life lesson out of that. Bitterness will drive you in a direction that you don't want to go. Resentment will take you to a place you don't need to be. And you'll waste a lot of your life, if you're not careful, being driven by what you think is other people's fault, when in reality it may be yours. Esau went on, and we'll find that later it worked out. But he lost a lot of his life because he lived it in resentment for things that really were of his own making and his own choice. He just had to pay the consequences of his actions. Did that make Jacob pure? Did that make Isaac any better? Did that make Rebekah any better? No, there was plenty of fault to go around for everybody. But somebody else's faults, somebody else's weaknesses, somebody else's shortcomings can't be a motivation for yours. So live your life for the glory of God, and take care of yourself, and let God take care of others. Have a good day.